Hi everyone, welcome to the lecture on alcohol. The poll that I posted about what we want to cover for the rest of the class, then 24 people said they wanted less alcohol and a day on hallucinogens versus 17 people that wanted just a bunch of alcohol and no hallucinogens. I am now realizing that that doesn't sound exactly right. So please don't take that out of context. But you know what I'm saying. So today, I did minimize the amount of alcohol related stuff. There is still a lot of slides, but I'm just not going to spend as much time on the slides. I took out a lot of the really fun history about alcohol because I figured we don't really test on that anyways. So we'll focus on how the alcohol works, dependence, stuff like that. So, and again, there are a few slides in here that I'm just going to kind of show you that are more for as you study, then there'll be nice study guides for the alcohol material. So let's get started. What is alcohol? So alcohol is the second most commonly used psychoactive drug after caffeine. It's also the single most abused drug in the world. There's some stats here about the US. There is a long history of abuse and use of alcohol throughout history. If you want to know more about that, I have slides on it. But we're not going to get into that too much. In case you're wondering, this is a picture of an old school brewery. Okay. I will give you just a little bit of evidence of when certain types of alcohol were introduced. So the very first fermented beverage, so like very first alcohol, was probably mead. So that's honey. And then we got beer with the Egyptians, and wine came from the Babylonians. You don't really need to know this, but I couldn't resist putting in some history. So, what are alcohols? Alcohol is a chemical term for a family of organic compounds containing a hydroxyl group, which will be bound to a saturated carbon group. Now, the type of alcohol that we drink, so like when we're talking about alcohol, what we're talking about is ethanol. So that's here. So ethyl alcohol or ethanol, these are alcoholic beverages. There are other types of alcohols, but they're not alcohols you drink. Okay? So ethanols are produced by the fermentation of sugars, so whether it's sucrose, glucose, fructose, or maltose. What is the pharmacology of our ethanols, or what we're going to refer to as alcohol for this class? So relative to other drugs, then very large quantities of alcohol are required to elicit effects. So compared to the amount of, say, cocaine you need to feel a high versus the amount of alcohol, there's a very large difference if you're measuring it just on like mils to mils, right? And that's just because ethanol is diluted. Okay, so beer tends to be between 4 and 8% alcohol. Spirits are between 25 and 60%. So even the higher spirits are still diluted. Now, natural grain spirits like vodka are the most pure ethanol in water. But you can obviously drink more of a lower dilute substance to then get more alcohol. Okay, so ABV stands for alcohol by volume. So 1% ABV means that there's 1 ml of pure alcohol in 100 ml of solution. So you can then calculate how much of each thing you'll need to drink to get so much of an alcohol. So Alcohol is administered orally, and then it's absorbed into your system. So alcohol is amphipathic, so it's both polar and non-polar. It has characteristics of both, which allows it to readily diffuse through the cell membranes. So it gets absorbed in the GI. About 10% occurs in the stomach and 90% occurs in the small intestine. And this is what contributes to that kind of delay between when you drink something and then when the tipsiness, the drunkenness occurs, right? So if you just take a shot, then you're not going to feel the effects of it right away. So you might think, oh, I'm not drunk yet, and then take another shot and another shot. And by the time the first one kicks in, you've had a few. And that's why it can be dangerous. Alcohol is transported in the body by passive diffusion. So relatively high concentrations will drive the rate of uptake. So the higher the concentration of the alcohol, the faster it's absorbed. So taking a shot of vodka will be absorbed in your body more than the same amount of, say, beer, which is of a lower concentration. The rate of passage to the small intestine does affect the rate of uptake as well. So that's why when you eat something, then it slows the uptake. And drinking something with carbonation will actually accelerate the uptake of alcohol because it allows the alcohol to move to the small intestine quicker. We've then also got alcohol dehydrogenase, or ADH, which is secreted in gastric fluids. And based on its name, you can probably guess that it is an enzyme that helps break down ethanol in your system. So that's what metabolizes it. Okay. Males do tend to have more ADH in their system, and this is one of the things that can lead to differences in the amount of alcohol someone can handle based on just sex. Now, how is the alcohol then distributed in our system? We know that it diffuses to all aqueous fluids and tissue using passive diffusion. So it's actually very easy to pass alcohol through the blood-brain barrier or the placental barriers. It has no problem with that at all, and that's why it does affect us so readily. It is excluded from fat tissues, so that's why there's a sex bias where females tend to have a higher percentage of body fat, and an age bias. So as males age, they increase the amount of body fat they have, and so that will then decrease the distribution volume, which leads to higher blood concentration. So as you age, you can't handle your alcohol as well because you have more body fat. And then females tend to have lower functioning amounts just because of the amount of body fat as well. Fun tables on the side if you want to look up different things. So we talked about the metabolism a little bit, talking about that alcohol dehydrogenase, which is in the liver to help break down alcohol. But there is a second enzyme as well, aldehyde hydrogenase, which also then helps break things down. So if we look here, we've got our alcohols. So whether it's ethanol or methanol, will get broken down by ADH first. It will then be broken down by aldehyde dehydrogenase, or ALDH. And that's kind of the end of the system for methanol. But in ethanols, then it gets created into new things by acetyl-CoA synthase, which then goes to the Krebs cycle. So genetic variability in the ALDH can reduce the risk of alcohol abuse, as the flushing reaction causes adverse conditioning to alcohol intake. Okay, so these are toxic intermediates. So when you break down ethanol, you get these toxic intermediates, which, boy, do those look like what happens when you drink a lot of alcohol or even a hangover. So those who carry an inactive ALDH allele tend to have reduced intake, while those that are homogeneous for an inactive one tend to avoid alcohol entirely just because they cannot handle it, because they get stuck in this toxic intermediate stage and they cannot break down acetaldehyde into acetic acid. Now, submetabolism does happen through cytochrome P450 family of enzymes, which can lead to drug interactions. So remember, we talked about with other drugs how taking alcohol with these drugs can actually alter what happens. So we talked about that with cocaine and others. So what's happening with this drug interaction is it's due to the competition for the cytochrome P450 family of enzymes. So this leads to an elevated drug concentration. And then the introduction of P450 with chronic use, so you actually start creating more of these enzymes, actually leads to a decreased drug concentration, which will lead to tolerance. Okay. Now, there are specific and non-specific effects of ethanol. The specific effects would be results of interactions with the receptors themselves, whereas non-specific effects result from interaction with the phospholipid membranes or bodily fluids. So first, those specific effects with the receptors, they cause most of the acute and chronic effects of intoxication. So when you're drunk, what you're feeling is due to the specific effects. It's also responsible for those subjective effects of intoxication. The non-specific effects is really just when ethanol interacts with that cell membrane, and it actually causes changes in the membrane protein function and cellular dysfunction. So it actually messes with the entire cell itself. It kind of starts to rearrange things, and these non-specific effects is what can lead to brain changes and severe long-term effects for people that become alcoholics, because these non-specific effects start to change the function and formation of your cells themselves. So we'll stop here, and in the next video, we'll start talking about the specific systems of these drugs.